There comes a moment, sometimes years after the relationship has ended, when the narcissist experiences something they've spent their entire existence trying to avoid, the recognition that they destroyed something irreplaceable. And this recognition often arrives not through dramatic revelation, but through the slow, accumulating weight of comparison. You see, after the narcissist has driven away the person who genuinely loved them, they don't stop seeking connection. They continue their pattern of pursuit, idealization, and consumption. They find new partners, new sources of validation, new people to fill the void. And initially, these new relationships provide what they always provide: the temporary inflation of the ego, the hit of being desired, the relief of not being alone with themselves. But something happens over time, usually without the narcissist consciously recognizing it at first. They begin to notice that these new relationships don't feel the same. The conversations lack a certain depth. The intimacy feels performative rather than genuine. The connection, while present, remains somehow superficial, even after months or years together. And in quiet moments, perhaps late at night, when the performance is exhausting to maintain, perhaps in the space between relationships, when they're alone with their thoughts, the narcissist finds themselves comparing. They remember conversations with their former partner that went somewhere, that touched something real, that made them feel seen in ways they didn't even appreciate at the time. They recall moments of genuine connection that they took for granted or actively sabotaged because the intimacy felt threatening. They start to recognize, often with tremendous resistance, that what they had wasn't just another relationship. It was qualitatively different. The person they destroyed didn't just love the performance, the false self, the carefully curated image. They loved the actual person underneath, the wounded, fragmented, terrified person the narcissist spends all their energy hiding from the world. This realization is devastating precisely because it reveals what the narcissist has been unable to replicate: authentic love. Not admiration, not infatuation, not the desperate attachment of someone with their own trauma bonds, but genuine love that saw them completely and chose them anyway. Every new partner becomes evidence of this loss. The narcissist might be with someone objectively attractive, accomplished, devoted, but they feel the hollowness. They sense that this person doesn't know them the way the former partner did, doesn't understand them at the same depth, doesn't connect with them at the same level. And worse, they recognize that they've created this superficiality. They've ensured no one can get close enough to truly know them, because true knowing led to abandonment. So they're trapped in a cycle where they can only form connections with people who don't actually see them, which means those connections can never satisfy the deeper longing for being known and loved. The one person who broke through that defense, who achieved genuine intimacy despite the narcissist's pathology, is the one they systematically destroyed through betrayal, devaluation, and cruelty. And here's what makes this particularly excruciating for the narcissist in their moments of clarity. They can't undo it. They can't go back and choose differently. They can't restore what they broke because the breaking was so complete, so cruel, so thorough that the person who loved them had to develop impenetrable boundaries just to survive. That love, once given so freely, has been permanently withdrawn, not from vindictiveness, but from necessity. The narcissist begins to understand in these undefended moments that they're searching for something in every new relationship that they already had and destroyed. They're trying to recreate a depth of connection that only existed because one specific person had the extraordinary capacity to see past their defenses and love them anyway. And that person is gone, not because they stopped loving, but because the narcissist made it impossible for them to stay. This creates a particular kind of torment. Every new relationship is haunted by the ghost of the one that was real. Every new partner is unconsciously measured against someone who can't be replaced, because what made them irreplaceable wasn't their specific qualities. It was their willingness and ability to love the narcissist authentically, completely, despite everything. The narcissist might never articulate this recognition, might suppress it immediately when it surfaces, might construct elaborate narratives to avoid facing it directly. But on some level, in the substrate of their awareness, they know. They know that they've encountered real love exactly once, and they annihilated it. They know that everything since has been a performance, a transaction, a hollow attempt to fill a space that was carved out by their own hand. And perhaps most painfully, they know that this wasn't done to them. This was done by them. They can't blame circumstances, can't point to the other person's flaws, can't construct a victim narrative that holds up under honest scrutiny. In whatever capacity they're able to access truth, they know they had something precious and they chose pathology over partnership, defense over depth, the familiar prison of narcissism over the terrifying freedom of being genuinely loved. The narcissist's hell isn't being alone, it's being surrounded by people, while knowing that the one person who made them feel less alone is gone forever because they made them leave. But there's another way the narcissist arrives at this breaking point, and it comes not from comparison with new relationships, but from something more fundamental, the undeniable recognition of their own patterns. And this recognition, when it penetrates their defenses, carries a particular kind of devastation. You see, narcissists are generally quite skilled at externalizing blame. Each relationship that fails can be explained away. That partner was too needy. This one was too independent. That one didn't understand them. This one expected too much. Each ending gets its own narrative, where the narcissist is either the victim of someone else's inadequacy or the enlightened one who outgrew a limiting relationship. But something happens when the pattern repeats enough times. When the third relationship ends the same way as the first two. When the fifth partner leaves with the same complaints as the previous four. When the narrative of bad luck or wrong people becomes increasingly implausible, even to the narcissists themselves. There comes a moment, usually not a single dramatic realization, but a slow creeping awareness that can no longer be fully suppressed, when the narcissist recognizes the common variable across all these failed connections, themselves. The relationship starts with intense idealization. The new partner is perfect, extraordinary, exactly what the narcissist has been searching for. There's love bombing, grand gestures, promises of forever, declarations that this connection is unlike anything you've experienced before. And in those early weeks or months, the narcissist genuinely believes their own performance this time will be different. This person is different. They've learned from past mistakes. But then, inevitably, the pattern continues. The idealization gives way to devaluation. The partner who was perfect becomes flawed. Small irritations become major grievances. The narcissist's criticism increases. Their empathy decreases. Their behavior becomes more erratic, more cruel, more designed to maintain control while pushing away genuine intimacy. And then comes the end. Either they discard the partner once they've extracted what they needed, or the partner finally develops enough self-respect to leave. Either way, the relationship follows the same arc. Idealization, devaluation, discard. Different actors, same script. Now, for a long time, the narcissist can avoid seeing this pattern. They can focus on the unique details of each relationship, the specific reasons why this one didn't work out. But after enough repetitions, these unique details start to blur into a recognizable pattern. And the pattern is damning. In moments of clarity, perhaps after yet another relationship has ended in familiar ways, perhaps when they're alone and their defenses are temporarily down, the narcissist confronts an unbearable truth. They are the pattern. Every relationship ends the same way, not because they keep choosing the wrong people, but because they keep being the same person. They keep employing the same defensive maneuvers, the same manipulation tactics, the same cycles of idealization and devaluation that make sustained intimacy impossible. And here's where the recognition becomes specifically devastating in relation to the person who genuinely loved them. That person loved them despite these patterns. That person saw the cycles, recognized the defensive maneuvers, understood the pathology, and stayed anyway, not from weakness or codependency, but from genuine love and the belief that beneath the patterns was a person worth loving. The narcissist begins to see, in these moments of uncomfortable clarity, that the one person who was willing to endure their patterns, who had the depth to understand them and the strength to maintain boundaries within the relationship, that person is the one they drove away through the very patterns they can no longer deny. This creates a specific form of regret, because the narcissist recognizes, however briefly, that they had someone who loved them not despite who they were, but with full awareness of who they were. Someone who saw the wounded child beneath the grandiosity, who understood the fear beneath the rage, who recognized the fragmentation beneath the performance, and offered love anyway. And what did the narcissist do with this extraordinary gift? They subjected that person to the same patterns they've subjected everyone to, the same devaluation, the same manipulation, the same cycles that make authentic connection impossible. They couldn't recognize the difference between someone who loved them superficially and someone who loved them deeply, because their pathology treats all relationships the same way. This realization that they destroyed something precious using the same patterns they're now beginning to recognize as their own is profoundly destabilizing, because it suggests that the problem wasn't that the relationship was imperfect or that the partner wasn't right for them. The problem was that their own patterns make any genuine relationship impossible to sustain. The narcissist begins to understand that they're not searching for the right person. They're the wrong person. They're the one who makes intimacy impossible, who turns love into a transaction, who transforms connection into control. And the person who loved them knew this, tolerated this, tried to work within this, until they finally couldn't anymore. And perhaps most devastatingly, the narcissist recognizes that if they couldn't maintain a relationship with someone that perceptive, that patient, that willing to see the best in them, then the problem isn't solvable through finding a better partner. The problem is internal, structural, woven into how they relate to everyone. This moment of recognition, when the narcissist sees themselves as the consistent variable across all their failed relationships and realizes they applied the same destructive patterns to the one person who actually loved them, this is when the breaking point occurs. Because it reveals that they didn't just lose a person, they prove to themselves that they're incapable of maintaining what they most desperately need: genuine connection with someone who truly knows them. When you finally see that you're the pattern, you can no longer blame the one who loved you despite it, only yourself for destroying them because of it. And then there's the moment that arrives from outside the narcissist's internal world, a moment they cannot control, cannot reframe, cannot explain away. It's when they witness, directly or indirectly, their former partner's authentic happiness. Not the performance of moving on, not the defensive display of doing better without you, but genuine thriving that's impossible to misinterpret. This might happen through social media, where the narcissist sees photos that capture something they never witnessed during the relationship: relaxed joy, unguarded laughter, a lightness of being. Or it might come through mutual friends who mention, almost casually, how well the former partner is doing, how different they seem, how much peace they've found. Or perhaps it's a chance encounter, running into each other at a social event, crossing paths in a familiar place, where the narcissist sees with their own eyes that this person has fundamentally changed in their absence. There's a quality to their presence that's new, or perhaps old, something that was suppressed during the relationship and has now been reclaimed. And what strikes the narcissist most forcefully is that this isn't the fragile, anxious, hypervigilant person they remember from the end of the relationship. This isn't someone still wounded, still processing, still caught in the aftermath. This is someone who has genuinely moved through and beyond, someone who has integrated the experience and emerged not just intact, but expanded. The former partner speaks with confidence the narcissist doesn't remember them having. They set boundaries with ease that seems almost casual. They laugh without the edge of anxiety that used to accompany their joy. They're pursuing interests, forming connections, building a life that's visibly fuller than anything they had during the relationship. And here's what makes this particularly devastating for the narcissist. This visible flourishing delivers a message that cannot be misinterpreted. The former partner isn't struggling without them. They're not diminished by the loss. They're not barely surviving, which would at least validate the narcissist's importance in their life. Instead, they're demonstrably better, happier, more whole, more themselves. This reveals something the narcissist has desperately tried to avoid knowing. The problem in the relationship was the narcissist's presence, not the partner's inadequacy. All those times, the narcissist criticized their partner for being too sensitive, too needy, too demanding. It turns out the partner wasn't inherently those things. They were those things in reaction to being in a relationship with someone whose pathology was actively destabilizing them. The anxiety the narcissist complained about, it was the nervous system's appropriate response to being with someone unpredictable and manipulative. The neediness, it was the desperate attempt to get basic emotional needs met in a relationship where those needs were consistently dismissed or weaponized. The emotional reactivity, it was what happens when someone is constantly invalidated, gaslighted, and made to question their own reality. Remove the narcissist from the equation, and all of those problems the narcissist used to justify their mistreatment, they dissolve. The partner who seemed so flawed, so difficult, so inadequate during the relationship is now thriving in ways that make it clear they weren't the problem. The relationship was the problem. More specifically, the narcissist was the problem. And the narcissist sees this. They see the evidence that this person didn't need them to be happy. In fact, they needed the narcissist's absence to access happiness. They see that what they interpreted as the partner's dependency was actually the partner diminishing themselves to accommodate the narcissist's pathology. They see that the love that was offered so freely during the relationship wasn't about the narcissist being special. It was about the partner having an extraordinary capacity for love that they're now directing toward people and pursuits that actually deserve it. This realization is crushing because it inverts everything the narcissist believed. During the relationship, the narcissist maintained, consciously or unconsciously, that they were doing the partner a favor by being with them. That the partner was lucky to have their attention, their presence, their occasional affection. That the partner's devotion was evidence of the narcissist's superior worth. But watching the former partner thrive reveals the truth. The partner was dim, inishing themselves to love the narcissist. They were sacrificing their own well-being, their own peace, their own wholeness to maintain a connection with someone who couldn't reciprocate. And once they stopped sacrificing themselves, once they reclaimed the energy they'd been pouring into the narcissist, they blossomed in ways the narcissist never witnessed, never inspired, never supported. The narcissist recognizes in moments when this truth penetrates their defenses that they weren't elevating their partner, they were depleting them. They weren't the prize the partner won. They were the weight the partner was finally strong enough to set down. The relationship didn't end because the partner couldn't handle the narcissist's greatness. It ended because the partner finally valued themselves enough to stop accepting treatment that was destroying them. And perhaps most painful of all, the narcissist sees that the former partner's happiness isn't contingent on replacing them with someone better. The partner isn't thriving because they found a new relationship that's healthier, though they may have. They're thriving because they're no longer in relationship with someone whose presence was actively harmful to their well-being. The narcissist becomes forced to confront a devastating conclusion. This person genuinely loved them, offered them authentic connection, and the narcissist's response was to systematically undermine their well-being until they had no choice but to leave for their own survival. And now that they've left, they're demonstrating every day what the narcissist refused to believe, that they were never the problem. The narcissist was. When the person you convinced was broken flourishes the moment you're gone, you can no longer pretend you weren't the thing breaking them. There's another way this breaking point arrives for the narcissist, and it comes not through comparison or pattern recognition or witnessing someone's happiness, but through crisis, real crisis, the kind that strips away performance and reveals what's actually there when everything else falls away. Perhaps it's a serious illness, a sudden loss, a moment of genuine existential despair. Something happens that penetrates the narcissist's defenses in a way that daily life usually doesn't. And in that moment of actual vulnerability, the narcissist reaches for their phone, scrolls through their contacts, and realizes something devastating. There's no one to call. Not no one literally, of course. The narcissist typically has plenty of contacts, plenty of people who might answer, but there's no one who will show up in the way the narcissist suddenly desperately needs. No one who will come without judgment, without needing the story to make sense, or the narcissist to perform wellness or gratitude. No one who will just be there unconditionally because they genuinely care about the narcissist's well-being. independent of what the narcissist can provide them. This is when the narcissist confronts the quality of relationships they've actually built over their lifetime. And what they find in this moment of genuine need is a landscape of transactional connections, conditional support, and people who are present for the performance but unavailable for the reality. There are people who will help if it makes them look good, if it's convenient, if the narcissist frames it correctly. There are enablers who might offer surface-level support while actually reinforcing the narcissist's avoidance of accountability. There are new supply sources who don't know them well enough to offer real comfort. There are former friends who've learned through experience that the narcissist's crises are often performances designed to extract attention. But there's no one who holds them in the way people hold those they genuinely love. No one whose concern is pure, whose support is unwavering, who shows up not because they're obligated or because they'll get something in return, but simply because they care. And in this moment of recognition, the narcissist remembers there was someone like that. There was one person who would have been that emergency contact, who would have shown up without hesitation, who would have sat with them in their darkness without needing them to perform their way out of it. The person they destroyed. The person who loved them at a depth that transcended performance, who saw them at their worst and still maintained care, who had the emotional capacity to hold both the narcissist's grandiosity and their fragility without being destroyed by either. The person whose love wasn't conditional on the narcissist being impressive or successful or charming. It simply was. And the narcissist drove that person away, not through a single catastrophic betrayal, though there may have been those too, but through the cumulative weight of being treated as a function rather than a person, as supply rather than a partner, as someone whose needs were inconvenient and whose feelings were expendable. That person eventually had to choose themselves because the narcissist consistently chose their pathology over partnership. And now, in this moment of actual crisis, the narcissist faces the consequence of that choice. The one person who would have been their emergency contact, who would have dropped everything to show up, who loved them in a way that would have survived even this crisis, they're permanently unavailable because the narcissist made them so. This isn't about the narcissist being literally alone. It's about being surrounded by people while recognizing that none of these connections have the depth to hold what they're actually experiencing. It's about scrolling through dozens or hundreds of contacts and knowing that none of them represent what they once had and destroyed. The narcissist begins to understand, perhaps for the first time, the difference between having people around you and having people who genuinely love you. The difference between relationships built on what you provide and relationships built on who you are. The difference between conditional support that evaporates under real pressure and unconditional love that persists even when you're at your worst. And they recognize that they had the latter once. They had someone who saw them completely, knew their worst qualities, witnessed their cruelest moments, and still maintained a foundation of care that could have survived this crisis and countless others. They had someone who would have been their soft place to land when everything else fell away. But they treated that person with such consistent disregard, such habitual devaluation, such fundamental disrespect, that the person had no choice but to build walls high enough to protect themselves permanently. Those walls aren't cruelty, they're survival. But they mean that in the narcissist's moment of genuine need, the one person equipped and willing to offer unconditional support is unreachable. The narcissist faces the reality that they've spent their life constructing a network of shallow connections while systematically destroying the one deep one. They've prioritized performance over presence, manipulation over intimacy, control over connection. And the price of those choices becomes clear in crisis. They have no one who actually knows them, no one who loves them independent of their performance, no one who will show up when showing up is hard. And the most devastating part isn't that they're alone in this crisis. It's that they didn't have to be. They had someone who would. I'll have weathered this with them who possessed both the love and the strength to show up in the hard moments. But the narcissist's pathology couldn't tolerate that level of authentic connection while they had it, and now that they need it, it's gone forever. You don't understand the value of someone who loves you unconditionally until the conditions you've created have driven them permanently away. But there's yet another dimension to this breaking point that often arrives later in the narcissist's life, and it carries a particular kind of existential weight. It's when mortality shifts from abstract concept to felt reality, when aging, illness, or simply the passage of time makes the narcissist confront the fact that their life is finite. And with that confrontation comes a terrifying question: will I die having been truly loved? This isn't the narcissist's typical preoccupation with legacy, with how they'll be remembered, with what mark they'll leave on the world. This is something more primal, more human, more stripped of grandiosity. It's the fundamental human need to know that we mattered to someone, that we were genuinely cherished, that someone saw us completely and loved us anyway. And as the narcissist ages, as time becomes more obviously limited, they begin to take inventory of their relational life. And what they find, if they're capable of any honesty with themselves, is a history of connections that were transactional, performances that were applauded, admiration that was cultivated, but very little that resembles genuine love. They've been desired for what they could provide: status, excitement, validation, reflected glory. They've been tolerated by people who benefited from proximity to them. They've been feared, admired, envied, pursued, but loved, actually loved in a way that penetrated to their core, that accepted their humanity, that persisted despite their flaws. That happened once with the person they destroyed. And now, facing the reality of finite time, the narcissist confronts a possibility that's almost unbearable. They may have already experienced their one opportunity for genuine love, and they annihilated it. They may spend the remainder of their life, which is now visibly limited, never again being loved the way that person loved them. This realization carries a particular kind of devastation because it's irreversible. When you're young, when time feels infinite, you can tell yourself there will be other chances, other people, other opportunities for connection. The loss of one relationship, however significant, still exists within a landscape of possibility. But as you age, as the years accumulate and patterns become more entrenched, that landscape changes. The narcissist begins to recognize that they're not going to fundamentally change. The pathology that destroyed that relationship is still there, still operating, still making genuine intimacy impossible. And even if they could change, which would require a level of sustained vulnerability and self-confrontation they've never been capable of, time is running out. They're not going to find someone else with that person's depth, that person's capacity to love, that person's willingness to see beneath the defenses. And even if by some miracle they did, they would likely destroy that connection too, because they haven't done the work that would make them capable of maintaining it. So the narcissist faces a haunting possibility. They may die surrounded by people, but profoundly unloved. They may accumulate more relationships, more connections, more people at their bedside when the time comes. But none of it will have the quality of authentic love they experienced and rejected. And there's a specific image that often haunts the aging narcissist in mom, hence of undefended awareness. It's the image of dying alone, not physically alone, but existentially alone, surrounded by people who are there out of obligation, out of social convention, out of proximity, but not out of genuine love. No one holding their hand who truly knows them. No one witnessing their final moments, who actually cherishes who they are beneath all the performance. They think about the person who loved them, and they imagine a different version of their life. One where they didn't drive that person away. One where that love was allowed to deepen over decades. One where they would face this final transition with someone who had journeyed with them, who knew their whole story, who loved them not despite that story, but within it. And they recognized that they traded that possibility, traded the chance of dying genuinely loved for what? For the maintenance of their defenses, for the protection of their false self, for the avoidance of vulnerability that authentic love requires. They chose pathology over partnership, and now they're facing the consequence of that choice across the remainder of their finite life. There's also often a recognition of practical loss that compounds the existential one. The person who loved them would have been there through aging, through illness, through decline. They would have been the partner who shows up to medical appointments, who advocates when the narcissist can no longer advocate for themselves, who makes the difficult decisions with genuine care for the narcissist's well-being. But that person is gone, has rebuilt their life, has perhaps found someone who can actually reciprocate their love. They're not coming back, not available for reconciliation, not open to being the narcissist's caretaker through the final chapters. And the narcissist is left with the relationships they've actually built. Shallow, conditional, transactional, facing the part of life that requires exactly the kind of deep, committed, unconditional love they destroyed. This creates a particular form of regret that's different from earlier regrets. When you're young, regret carries the promise of redemption. You can make different choices. You can change. You can find new love. But when you're aging, and you recognize that your patterns are entrenched, that your capacity for change is limited, that the person who loved you authentically is permanently gone, regret becomes something heavier. It becomes the recognition that you've foreclosed possibilities that won't return. The narcissist begins to understand that they didn't just lose a person, they lost their one experience of being genuinely loved, and they lost it in a way that can't be recovered or replicated in the time they have remaining. They destroyed the relationship that would have given their life a kind of meaning and depth that all their achievements, all their conquests, all their accumulated admirers can never provide. And they faced the remainder of their finite existence knowing this truth. They had someone who would have loved them through everything, including death, and they chose their pathology over that love. Now they'll die the way they lived, surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. When you realize that the person who would have loved you until your last breath is gone, because you chose your defenses over their devotion, mortality becomes unbearable. And finally, we arrive at the rarest form of this breaking point, one that occurs in exceptional circumstances and is almost never sustained. But when it happens, it reveals something profound about the possibility and tragedy of narcissistic self-awareness. This is the moment when the narcissist's defenses completely collapse, when they're stripped of all their usual mechanisms for avoiding truth, and they allow themselves, perhaps for mere minutes, perhaps in a single therapy session, perhaps in profound solitude, to feel the full weight of what they've done. Not the romanticized version they tell others, not the victim narrative where they lost something precious through bad luck or circumstance, but the unvarnished, undefended truth. Someone loved them authentically, and they destroyed that love through deliberate cruelty, systematic betrayal, and emotional violence. This moment is vanishingly rare because it requires the temporary suspension of everything the narcissist's psyche is organized around. It requires them to drop the grandiosity that protects against shame, to abandon the victim stance that protects against accountability, to release the blame that protects against self-confrontation, to sit undefended with the reality of their own actions and their consequences. And what emerges in this undefended moment is devastating. The narcissist sees clearly, perhaps for the first time in their life, that they are the architect of their own isolation, that the loneliness they experience, the hollowness of their connections, the inability to find genuine love again, all of it stems from patterns they created and sustained. All of it results from choices they made, repeatedly, to protect their false self at the expense of authentic connection. They see the specific moments of cruelty, the times they deliberately said things designed to wound, the betrayals they rationalized, the systematic devaluation of someone who deserved cherishing. They see how they took someone's love and weaponized it, how they used intimate knowledge of someone's vulnerabilities to manipulate and control them, how they transformed what could have been a sanctuary into a battlefield. And they see their own motivations with uncomfortable clarity. They weren't acting from strength, when they devalued their partner. They were acting from terror of genuine intimacy, of being truly known, of depending on someone in ways that might make them vulnerable. They weren't asserting independence when they betrayed. They were desperately trying to maintain the illusion of control, to prove they didn't need anyone, to avoid the confrontation with their own emotional dependency. They recognized that every cruel thing they did was driven by their own fragmentation, their own fear, their own inability to tolerate the authentic vulnerability that real love requires. And they see that the person who loved them understood this, tolerated this, tried to love them through this, until they simply couldn't anymore without destroying themselves. In this moment of undefended clarity, the narcissist feels something they've spent their entire life avoiding: appropriate guilt. Not the performative guilt they might display to manipulate others, not the defensive stance where they're the victim of their own actions, but genuine remorse for harm they knowingly caused to someone who didn't deserve it. They feel the weight of having taken someone's extraordinary capacity for love, a gift that's rare and precious, and having abused it, exploited it, ultimately destroyed it. They recognize that this person offered them something many people never experience in their entire lives: unconditional positive regard, the capacity to be seen completely and loved anyway, partnership that could have deepened over decades. And they chose to systematically dismantle it, not in one catastrophic moment, but through 1,000 smaller cruelties, 1,000 betrayals of trust, 1,000 prioritizations of their own ego over their partner's humanity. This recognition, when it occurs, is so painful that the narcissist almost never sustains it. The defenses rush back in, often within minutes or hours. The rationalizations return. I was doing my best. They weren't perfect either. We were both responsible. It just wasn't meant to be. The blame shifts back outward. The victim narrative reasserts itself. The grandiosity rebuilds. But in that brief window before the defenses reconstruct themselves, the narcissist knows. They know exactly what they did. They know it wasn't confusion or miscommunication or incompatibility. It was violence, emotional, psychological, sometimes physical. It was the systematic destruction of someone who loved them, carried out by someone who was too defended to receive that love. And they know, in whatever capacity they're able to access this knowledge, that this wasn't inevitable. They made choices. In each moment of cruelty, there was an alternative. They could have been kind. In each betrayal, there was an option. They could have been faithful. In each devaluation, there was a choice. They could have cherished. They chose pathology every time. And the cumulative weight of those choices drove away the only person who loved them authentically. This moment of clarity, when it occurs, is often immediately followed by even more intense defensive operations. The narcissist might leave therapy and never return. They might plunge into new relationships with even more intensity, desperate to prove to themselves they can find love again. They might construct elaborate justifications for their behavior, now with more psychological sophistication, from having glimpsed the truth they need to defend against. But they can't entirely undo what happened in that moment of undefended recognition. Somewhere in their psyche, beneath all the reconstructed defenses, the truth remains. They destroyed real love not because they had to, not because circumstances forced them, but because their pathology wouldn't allow them to do anything else. And that truth, however deeply buried, becomes part of their internal landscape, a wound they created in themselves through the destruction of someone else. The tragedy isn't just that they destroyed someone who loved them. It's that in their rarest moments of honesty, they know it, they feel it, and they still cannot sustain the vulnerability required to change. When you finally see yourself clearly, see that you destroyed the only person who loved the real you. The defenses don't disappear. They just have to work harder to help you forget what you saw.